Major Lindsey and Africa presents Bouncing Back, conversations about resilience for lawyers.
Welcome to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. This podcast is brought to you by Major Lindsey and Africa, the global leader in legal search and consulting. I'm your host, Rebecca Glatzer. I'm a managing director in the associate practice group at Major Lindsey and Africa. In this podcast, I speak to successful professionals about the hiccups, bumps, bruises, and setbacks they've experienced in their personal and professional lives. Ultimately, we learn how they bounce back to flourish. Today, my guest is my friend, Manita Rawat. She is the managing partner of Duane Morris's Silicon Valley office, and she is a member of the firm's intellectual property practice group. She's a registered patent attorney with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Manita has a technical background in applied mathematics with a concentration in computer science, aerospace engineering, and statistical analysis. Manita, like me, is a graduate of the University of Illinois College of Law. She's fluent in Hindi and speaks conversational German. She's a member of Duane Morris's Governing Partners Board and serves on its Diversity and Inclusion Committee. She has received numerous awards for her contributions to her community and the profession, including but not limited to the Silicon Valley Business Journal Women of Influence Award and the Best Under 40 Award from the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association. Manita, thank you for being my guest today.
Well, thank you for having me, Rebecca. It's exciting to be on here with a former law school classmate.
Absolutely. I'm excited as well. During the Great Recession, you were laid off from your law firm job. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, it was in the 2008-2009 time frame. Obviously, we were, we had an economy that had declined substantially from the 90s and even the early 2000s. And law firms were heavily impacted at that time. And I was laid off along with a few of my peers at other law firms when the work had dried up at those firms.
Definitely. I remember that time well, unfortunately. For me, and the associates at our firm, we knew something was up because the partners started disappearing in the middle of the day. We learned after the fact that they were going to a conference room down the hall to conference about what they were going to do, about what was going on. Was your experience a shock, or did you see it coming?
No, I think it was, I think we all knew it was coming. I was a first year associate back in 2000, right at the end of 2005. And there was a substantial amount of work then, and you saw it readily decline. And by the time, 2008, 2009 hit, we were, as associates, I was obviously a third, fourth year associate at the time when that happened, and we saw the work substantially decline and hours go down. So I knew something was going to happen. I just didn't know to the extent what that was going to be. Obviously, I got called in one day to the office managing partner's office and was told that I was going to be given, approximately 3 months to find a new job, which I thought was very generous. And
definitely.
Yeah. And so then it hit me and then I knew I had to do something.
Right. Exactly. Like take action. Like I've got a mortgage and student loans and I need to do something about this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have bounced back beautifully from that Great Recession firing. You are, now in many ways at the pinnacle of your career. You're a partner at one of the biggest and most profitable law firms in the world, Duane Morris. The leaders of that firm saw it fit to make you the managing partner of a burgeoning, growing office in Silicon Valley. You are one of the few female minority partners in the AmLaw 100. And even in the sort of more rarefied air of being, you know, an office managing partner and the leader at an AmLaw firm, how did that happen after bouncing back from the Great Recession?
Well, it's something I hadn't really thought about. I feel like the last the last decade has just flown by. I will say, like anything that comes as a shock that may be, a failure to a certain extent, there is a grieving period that I think one owes themselves.
Yes.
Whether it's, eating a tub of ice cream for a week and
You're speaking my language.
right. And we didn't have Netflix streaming back then, but you could, watch a bunch of movies on your DVR that you had taped. You do that. And I think, there was that period where I think everyone owes themselves after a breakup or after a major rejection or failure, where you need that time to process what happened, especially when you're so young. I mean, at the time, I think I just turned 30, and relatively speaking, you are very young at the time, and that's a major blow. So I think you need that time to just kind of process what happened, and then just grieve for a little while, and maybe have a pity party or whatever you want to call it. But I say limit that to just no more than a week, and I think then comes your planning about the future. And
Right.
Right. And I think after that point, what I did was I reached out to recruiters like you, and let them know what had happened and if they could help me find a new job, and brushed up my resume. And what was fortunate for me, and I think a lot of junior associates like me who had been laid off, is that your third, fourth, fifth years out of law school, you're very marketable as an associate.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and yeah, and so I was, my firm had given me 3 months to find a new job, and I had found a new job within a month. So there wasn't really this gap in my resume. There wasn't this lack of receiving a paycheck. So I consider myself very fortunate.
Yes.
Right, in that respect. And I also I read a book at the time. It's called We Got Fired, and it's the best thing that ever happened to us, by Harvey McKay. And I recommend that book to anyone. Right now we're going through a pandemic and another recession and another economic hit, that I recommend anybody who has been laid off or down on their luck right now to read this book, because it really inspired me. And I think that reading that book kind of set my next steps, that really set the stage for my career to enable me to be where I'm at now. And in particular, this book goes through lots of famous people who had also been fired at some point in their career, and then what they did to bounce back and become very successful. And one particular person in this book that I remember who was discussed is Pat Mitchell. And Pat Mitchell, for those who are listening who don't know her, she was the first woman president and CEO of PBS at the time. And she was actually working as a researcher and writer for Look magazine when she was younger. And that magazine ended up having to lay her off because they were going out of business. And, she, after that, ended up becoming, the first woman president and CEO of PBS. And they had more stories like that of just famous people who bounced back. And I think you need inspiration when you are knocked down like that. You need something that lets you know that this happens to everyone at some point in their career. They're going to have a setback. They're going to have something that may knock them off their feet. But as humans, we have the capacity to come back and move forward and thrive from that. We just can't stay knocked down. And I think that book really helped me. And I think what I really learned about that, and the book kind of goes into this, is when you've been fired or terminated or laid off, find out why and learn from that. And then do some steps to prevent that from happening again.
Yes.
In my case, obviously, I learned that, when you, as an associate, when you work for a partner and the partner no longer has work, you are out of luck as the associate because
Yes.
you're kind of dependent
Yes.
on work from that partner. And it struck me early. I mean, I was fourth year associate at the time. It struck me early that, you know what, I'm going to be prepared for the next recession if and when that comes.
Yes.
Where I don't want to be
Yes.
dependent on somebody else feeding me. And it
Yes.
was at that point that I decided, on my new platform, this new law firm that I'm going to, I'm going to build my own book of business while I was there. And I was really fortunate enough. I was working for a St. Louis based firm at the time to work under a partner who was an extraordinary entrepreneur. And I watched him and how he built his patent prosecution practice. And he had recognized, my personality as being somewhat different from your traditional patent attorney. And he knew that I had some contacts. So he kind of pushed me in that direction. Like, you can leverage your contacts into building your own book of business. And so I started there with one particular client that I ended up pitching and then getting the work. And what I didn't realize at the time was that client was looking at me as, hey, here's this young associate. Maybe if we, have her be our outside counsel and she learns about our company, she may want to come work for us in-house at some point. And that was their thinking. So it made me realize, like, you should be, as a young attorney, out there trying to market yourself, because there are opportunities like that. And obviously, I started off with a very, with a small book of business, but then just grew it. And it would keep growing. And, then my clients were starting to grow. I went from one client to three, and then they were all out in California. So I needed to be at a firm that had a California office. So I came to my current firm. I came to Duane Morris at the time. I think I was a 7th or 8th year associate at the time. And I started in our Las Vegas office. And, just continuing to build the book of business. And eventually, 4 years ago, I moved out here because the book had grown substantially at that point, and I wanted to grow it even more, that it made sense to be out in Silicon Valley, where most of my clients are located. And then 2 years ago, became the managing partner of this office, and now tasked to grow the office, which is an exciting new chapter in my life. But I really learned that, after I got terminated and I came to the firm that I went to after that termination was develop a really good skill set as a lawyer. And I was determined to be a good patent lawyer, and make sure I got the appropriate training to be a good patent lawyer. And then B, build my own book of business so that when the next recession hit, I was going to ensure I wouldn't be impacted again. And sure enough, 2020, we were hit with a pandemic. Some work had slowed down. My work did not. In fact, it grew this year because, there was just so much work in the tech space out in Silicon Valley in response to the pandemic. So it was good. But I'm glad that I started that base book of business back when I was a fourth year, so that now, being a fifth year partner, I had, something that was more substantial and that could withstand another recession.
Yeah, and kudos. And it's, been a long time coming. It clearly took some patience. This is a decade-long, give or take, endeavor of yours, and you built something that is sustainable and has allowed you to have the kind of career that you can enjoy and have some a bit of a safety net, and it's enviable. What advice would you have for up and coming lawyers who are like, okay, yeah, I get it, I need a book of business, but they didn't teach me how to sell in law school. They don't teach you that. They didn't teach, I don't have, I don't come from a long line of business people with impressive contacts that can put me in touch with their dad's cousin's dog walker who has his book of business. I'm being a little facetious here, but some people sort of rely very heavily on parental or grandparent contacts or that sort of thing. What advice would you have for someone who feels that the task of building a book, it just scares them?
Yeah, and I will say it is scary, but one needs to try and just take the risk and put yourself out there, and don't let anything be a limitation or barrier. I know, just having gone through the law firm world, you witness, as you mentioned, people that have the contacts or had, the family relationships. And I think most of us see at law firms, or even in law school, we went to school with children of lawyers, right? And then when they go to law school, they get contacts because their dad was a lawyer, and maybe their dad had a book of business that the dad is handing down. And I hear that a lot from younger associates who say, well, I just, I don't have a family of lawyers, and the only people who have books are people who come from a family of lawyers because, they had their family members hand it to them. And that's not always the case. Yes, that is sometimes the case, and certainly an advantage that people who may have had the family history of being in the legal profession be helpful to them. I certainly did not come from a family of lawyers at all. My father is a college professor, and my mom's a researcher at the university, and they were in the academics, so they're not even in the business world. And so I did not have that, but here's what we all have, I think, as young law firm associates. We have peers and colleagues, and a lot of those peers are through relationships that we had in law school, right? Or it could be relationships that we had with our peer associates at law firms. And
Yep.
a lot of those guys end up going in-house, and they could be your point of contact and be somebody who could send you work as outside counsel. I think I think there's a little bit of luck to it as well. I know my clients that I have now came through, meetings. I met one at a conference, and I met another through a mutual lawyer friend, and they were looking for an outside counsel who's a patent lawyer at the time, and it ended up being a very good book. But you know what we what we all have in common is that peer group of people, and so I always stress, be a good person, be a nice
Yes.
person. That I think
Yes.
that this profession, and even in law school, can harbor a very competitive environment, right?
Yes.
And where maybe people aren't that nice to their peers because they're trying to get ahead. But here's what I learned is, if you are nice, if you display kindness, if you just are authentic and genuine, people remember that. And I get, calls from in-house attorneys all the time where, it was somebody I, was an associate with at one of the firms I was at, or maybe I went to law school with them, and they reached out, and they'll say, oh, I see you're doing patent work. We have some issues at my company, could you help us out? And so, don't be disheartened by the fact that you may not have some family connection. I certainly didn't. That shouldn't negate you from having a book. It just, putting yourself out there, meeting people, even just reaching out to old colleagues and law school classmates, that could be a starting point. The other thing I want to stress is that, for women and diverse lawyers, it's a really great time, because I can't think of a Fortune 500 company that isn't having diversity as a platform for their company right now, and as an initiative right now. And with that, they want to work with women and diverse attorney outside counsel. So this is the perfect time to go to industry conferences, legal conferences, where you can be in front of in-house attorneys, because they are looking for women of color. They're looking for people of color. They're looking for women to work with and help out at a law firm.
Yes. It's like strike while the iron's hot. This is a big driver for a lot of companies right now. And on the recruiting side of things, we are getting a lot of, it's sort of a drumbeat that, bring us diverse attorneys of all kinds, kind of thing. And, obviously you've got to be careful in terms of making sure your pool of candidates is diverse and not narrow and includes a little bit of everything. But there's definitely this sort of drumbeat, and it's a wonderful time to take advantage of that if you're a young up and coming attorney, for sure. Definitely. You have been very kind during this conversation to, obviously give credit to mentors, obviously some good books, good fortune. But I want to come back to your own experiences and talk about the fact that you are a resilient person, the person who eats ice cream for a week and then pulls himself up and brushes himself off and says, okay, I need to build a book of business. That's not everyone, right? That's special and unique to you. And so I wanted to ask, when you sort of reflect on all of this in your career and your life experiences, Manita, what experiences or influence in your past do you think helped to make you a resilient person?
I think what has helped me be a resilient person is that, I'm a daughter of immigrants, and the first place we immigrated to was Grand Forks, North Dakota. where obviously we stuck out like a sore
Yes.
thumb. You know, everyone's blonde hair, blue eyed in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and here we were, this Indian immigrant family. And I think that, you know, obviously I can't recall any overt racism that we experienced, but I think there was implicit racism and implicit biases that we experienced. And I think when you experience that and when you see something like that, you kind of have the mindset of, okay, this world is going to be different for me, and people who look like me, and people who are in the similar boat, whether they are immigrants, whether they're people of color, whether, you know, they have gender differences than you're than you know, being a white man, right?
Right.
Um, and so you realize early on the privileges that, you know, a white man would have, right?
Yes.
And you see that because you get treated as a woman of color very differently early on.
Yeah.
And I think having that awareness and that knowingness that, okay, I'm going to have to work harder. I'm going to have to, um, you know, accept challenges in a way that a white man with certain privileges, and by the way, just being a white man in itself is a privilege. You know,
Right.
I'm not going to have that. And I think it was instilled in me by my immigrant parents, in that, you know, they recognized what was going on in the small town that we were living in, and instilled that sense of, okay, you know what, you're going to have to work 10 times harder. You're going to have to do better than everyone else in order to get the same recognition, right? And that was instilled early on in me, you know, for school, right? You're going to have to do very well in school. You're going to have to do, you know, you just have to do better than everyone else. And I think that has carried with me throughout, you know, college, throughout law school, and then into my profession. I think, you know, I mean, there are law firm studies, right, of the implicit bias that goes on, and, you know, you will see, you know, the white male associates get staffed on things, and, you know, the women and diverse attorneys do not. You know, the opportunities are not as prevalent. um and
Yes.
and so knowing that, I think early on kind of sets the stage for, okay, there are going to be challenges, and there are going to be lots of rejections throughout my life, but I can't succumb to them. I always have to
Yes.
get beyond them. I have to overcome them. And I think having that, the values that my immigrant parents instilled in me, and just being different in a small town, in, you know, small town America. And then, you know, and then we moved to Reno, Nevada when I was 10 years old, which wasn't that much different.
Just slightly warmer, maybe.
Yeah, just slightly warmer. You know, but very similar demographic. You know, I think that, you know, people could say, God, what an awful experience. You know, I know, like when I went to law school, a lot of the people of color in our law school class were from Chicago, and I would tell them about my upbringing in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and Reno, Nevada, and they would just say it's so awful. And I didn't actually think it was. I thought it was actually a great experience, in that I think it made me who I am today, having had those experiences, because I could witness the implicit biases early on in life, so that when I
Yes.
went to a law firm, I was prepared for that.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Yeah.
a
It's
shock to me, right? It
yeah, less
wasn't a,
shocking.
Right. Right. It wasn't shocking. It was, oh, okay, yeah, no, I know. I know this happens. Whereas I think
Yeah.
it could be shocking for a lot of people who may not have experienced that before.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just I sort of had an epiphany as you were talking. It's almost as if you can almost look at it with a critical, almost sort of non-emotional eye. Not that you wouldn't have emotions and be tweaked that you didn't get on a matter that you think you are the perfect person to be on, or when you see the implicit bias, it's not like that it doesn't sort of spark emotion and irritation and anger, let's say, perhaps hurt, but you could almost sort of take a step back and go, okay, yeah, I know what that is. I know what's happening right there. And then almost sort of problem solve your way around it, figure out a way to deal with it in a productive way. Cause you're like, this is not my first rodeo. I have done this before. I've seen this in a different form. And therefore it can sort of inform how you strategically navigate your career going forward. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. It was almost a level of acceptance, right?
Yes.
That this is the way the world is, and we just have to navigate it. We can't get angry. We can't, that's not going to solve anything. We can't, scream at people. We can't, we just accept it and we move
Yeah.
forward from it,
Yeah.
navigate.
Well, if you're in my way, I'm going to go under you, over you, around you.
Right.
Maybe
Right.
I have to, but I'm just going to deal with the consequences. Well, we've got a few more minutes left, and I have a final question that I wanted to ask you. You touched on a lot of different things, but as we know, this past year has been really difficult for a lot of people, especially young, newly practicing attorneys. Many of them have been furloughed, laid off, faced pay cuts, uncertainty about their hours and the future of their careers. And they're also experiencing upheaval in their personal lives if they've had a sick loved one, dealing with, parents and all kinds of things. And, obviously the millennials and Gen Xers, many of them were too young to be directly impacted by the Great Recession in the way that we were. And it's the first time in their adult lives that they're kind of dealing with this level of certainty in multiple different areas of their lives. And I just wanted to, if you had kind of some nuggets of advice about, because this is not something that's going to remedy tomorrow. I have a feeling there'll be some fallout for the next months and years to come. What we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to be able to fix it, economically and otherwise quickly. What are your thoughts for those individuals who are experiencing this for the first time?
I would say, and it's actually, there's lots of things I would say. I mean, it's interesting because I mentor a lot of associates at my firm and in the legal community out here in Silicon Valley, and they've all, expressed, the oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And I've even talked to associates who have been laid off and they have until, the end of December to find a new job. And I always given this piece of advice is, just have hope and faith that, this will turn, the tide will turn, and you can't ever lose that faith. I think if you lose the faith that things will get better, then it won't. You just have to endure it and stay positive and know that it's not the end of the world. I think it's easier to say that now that I've already gone through this, and when I was laid off, it was, more than a decade ago. But I understand. I mean, I remember, like I said, I think I ate ice cream every night for a week when I got laid off, and I did.
Ice cream is my drug of choice too. I'm down with the ice cream as a
right. And would I have known back then that I would be in the position I am now? No, absolutely not. I would never have dreamed to be in the position I am now back then. But what I did learn is that, you need to control the things you can control.
Yeah.
And that is obviously getting back on your feet, getting a new job, learning from the mistakes that you made in your old job, and mitigating those mistakes at your new job. And for me, it was, okay, I'm going to build my own book of business, and then striving for that. Every successful person has had many rejections and failures. And in fact, the most successful people probably have had the most number of failures and rejections. I think, if you look at any famous Hollywood actor or actress, they can tell you of the 6 parts that they got that, everyone loves them for, and they made millions and millions of dollars for. They could tell you there were 20 parts that they got rejected for, right?
Exactly.
So I think that it's important to know that this happens, failure happens, and rejection happens, but it makes us better. It transforms us to be better people, and then to work harder to have success. And I think that you just need to look at it that way. This is just a part of life. I can't think of anybody who has not been terminated at least once in their life, right? And
present company included. I too
right.
have been terminated more than once. Yes, and
right.
I'm better for it.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And that termination has probably driven your success. I can tell you, had that experience not happened to me, back when I was a 3rd, 4th year associate, I don't think I would have a book of business today. Like that had to happen to me for me to realize what was important at a law firm, and to really understand the business side of law firms. And had that never happened to me, I wouldn't have had a book of business. I wouldn't be the managing partner of an office today. So that needed to happen. So I always tell associates this who've been laid off, who have had a setback or a failure. That failure needs to happen for your success later. It propels success. So accept it and learn from it, and then grow from it and move past it. But you won't be successful without that failure.
Amen. That's great. Well, thank you, Manita, for your time. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your experiences that you shared with our listeners today. They are valuable, and I know that our listening audience will find what you've said very useful. I really sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. Join us next time for another story about thriving after overcoming challenges. You can find Bouncing Back and other programming for lawyers on MLA's Legal Talk Network.